Hello, everyone. Um, we're going to start right now our last discussion forum of the day, and we're going to talk about conservation funding. So current financial resources dedicated to protection and management of our net reward are widely considered to be critically important and chronically insufficient. This forum will explore the realm of conservation funding for planet and people, gaining insights from two individuals who have been securing and mobilizing financial resources while navigating conservation priorities, project timelines, social values, and economic realities. So I'm glad to introduce Jean Gael, DJ Colomb. So Jean Gael is the CEO of the Wildlife Conservation Network, WCN, an organization that brings together conservation and supporters to advance solutions for people and wildlife to coexist and thrive. Under his leadership, WCN identifies and scales high-impact conservation efforts by providing a global network of conservation entrepreneurs with the resources and community needed to succeed. With a career spanning over 25 years at the intersection of conservation and development, from tracking great apes in Gabon to leading nonprofit network, GJ believes that the most effective conservation solutions are rooted in collaboration and community engagement. Prior to WCN, he managed projects for the World Resources Institute and the Wildlife Conservation Society. He holds a PhD in interdisciplinary ecology and a concentration in tropical conservation and development from the University of Florida, where he specialized in how tourism affects the well-being of rural communities. Originally from Paris, he now lives in the Bay Area. When he isn't working to bridge the gap between donors and field programs, he is mostly likely trying to keep up with his wife and two children in nature, on soccer pitches, and across their local food landscape. He's dedicated to building a collaborative future where both nature and local people prosper. So now I'm really glad to present Maria Di Giano as well. I had the pleasure to meet her in Quito, Ecuador, in our workshop about indigenous rights and governance systems. So Maria Di Giano is also a TCD alumna, and she works on the Andes Amazon Institute at the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation, where she leads the management and implementation of a portfolio of grants supporting indigenous and local communities lands across the Amazon region. Maria is an environmental anthropologist with over 2 decades of experience as a researcher and practitioner at the intersection of environmental conservation, sustainable development, and human well-being. Thank you, and the mic is yours.
Great, thank you. I didn't realize we were going to read my whole bio, but that was pretty long. We're going to take things, I think, in a different direction. And first of all, we just want to thank University of Florida and the Tropical Conservation Development Program for having us here. And for just existing. We had a fantastic experience as students. We've learned so much. I don't think we'd be in the positions that we're in if it wasn't for our experience here. It also happened to work out pretty well personally, so that was nice. But we're really thankful to have the opportunity to come back and to give in any way that we can. We're going to take things, I think, in a different direction, not presenting any kind of research. We don't have any slides. We just want to talk through and hopefully stimulate a conversation and think about why we're all here. When we talk about these funding models, I think it's also important to anchor it into why we're doing what we're doing. And I think we're all here because we care about particular landscapes, particular geographies, species, communities, people. And when we look at our work, I think we try to measure that impact often in species that are conserved or various kinds of metrics or communities that are supported or some economic measures or all those factors. And all those metrics really do matter. But none of that really happens without the strategic deployment and ultimately the strategic raising of funds. Resources are a key part of all of this. And I don't know, I look around the room, I know many people, I don't know anybody, but I don't think anybody really entered this field thinking that we were going to be trying to raise money. But at the end of the day, that's a lot of what we do. We try to do our work, and in the course of doing so, we have to get some resources. And I think work is or fundraising is a big part of that. So when I stepped into it, I think we were really inspired and motivated by this love of nature, this love of culture. And fundraising felt relatively uncomfortable for me. And I think I'll talk a little bit more about it at the end. It felt somewhat transactional. So in the course of both of our work, I think our lens kind of shifted about that. And we wanted to take some time today to break that barrier, to have a conversation, recognizing there are many other people in the room who have a lot of experience also raising funds very successfully. And so hopefully it isn't just the two of us here, but it's also a conversation with other folks in the room so we can benefit the rest of our community.
Yeah, thank you so much, and great to be here. I won't repeat the things that GJ said about the amazement of being back here at UF. Can you hear me okay? Is it working? No? Okay, how about now? Okay, perfect. So I'm not going to repeat anything that GJ said about how amazing it is to be back here at UF. I didn't include in my bio that I also was part of TCD. I came in 2003 to work with Mary Ann Schmink and graduated in 2011 with a PhD. I never came here thinking I would stay for a PhD and, love the community. And like GJ, we came to conservation really with a passion for making an impact and a difference. And I think what we're doing now does that in a different way. And so we did want to start this conversation by saying that we're here today to talk about our personal experiences, two different models of conservation funding, and acknowledging that here in this room, there's a wealth of expertise. In fact, the team from the Andes Amazon Initiative, our program director, is here along with other program officers, and they will probably have a different take on, some of the things that I'm going to talk about. There are people here from banks, from BNDES, we have Funbio, we have IPE and their experience with Funda Lira. So, just encourage you all to ask the same questions and think and speak to other people about these models. So what we hope to do today and what we're going to talk about is just talk a little bit about how each of these models works, try to demystify a bit this complex world of conservation funding, and what we really hope to do is also have a lot of time for discussion and questions and for others to complement some of the things that we're going to talk about. So
yeah, I think it's a great place to start. So as I was saying, I came into this world of the Wildlife Conservation Network from a place of being a practitioner. And more WCN really exists to create a space for both donors and conservationists to get together so that they can advance their mission mutually. And so fundraising is a big part of that. But I didn't really have any experience fundraising beyond just writing a grant. And I think that's most of the students' experience and most of my practitioners' experience. I was working for WCS before coming to grad school, was similar, was just writing grants. And I realized there was this whole other world of fundraising. And to be honest, it felt somewhat dirty. I felt like, I have to go out there and kind of put my hand out and try to convince people. And it just didn't feel great. And I realized that it's a lot more complex than that, and it's a lot simpler than that at the same time, because ultimately I developed relationships with people, and that's what I had been doing my whole career in various ways. And so fundraising and raising funds is about developing those relationships. It's about actually finding a way to match people who have resources and give them an opportunity to have impact. And all of you are the vessel. You're that impact. And that was a transformative realization for me to think, I'm not out there asking for money. I'm not out there with my hand out. I'm actually giving these people a tremendous opportunity to carry out the work that they want to see carried out, but they're sitting, in DC or New York or San Francisco or all over the place, they don't have the opportunity, the time, the expertise, the resources to go to the Amazon or many other parts of the world and to do the work that all of you do. And so that was a big transformative shift for me, was to realize that, this was a real partnership. So I kind of wanted to get a show of hands here to see who else had that experience. Like, who else has felt dirty or uncomfortable asking for money before? Just raise your hand. Okay, so that's most of us. And if keep your hand up, actually. Well, actually, you get it down. We'll ask it for you to raise it up again. How many of you have had an experience where in the course of explaining your project or having a conversation or even maybe reporting back after having received some funds, have you seen the person's face kind of light up and suddenly feel like it wasn't about the money anymore? Like, okay, so raise your hand, those people who are nodding their heads. So I think that's fewer hands. So that's the experience that we all try to strive for. It's getting to that point. It's getting to that level of comfort. It's really breaking down and realizing that it's not as much of a power dynamic as you think it is. It is ultimately realizing that we're united by this passion, that we want to see something done, and then we each have different things to that puzzle and we can make it advance together. And I think that's a big shift for most of us. And so it isn't always in the form of writing a grant. So the WCN model is really quite unique because we act as this honest broker between people who have the resources and people who can actually carry out the work. We've been around for about 24 years. I've been with them for 12. Over that 24-year period, we've been able to raise and deploy about $475 million to get to the field. We have a model also where we can guarantee that 100% of the funds that we raise that are designated for a species can get to that species. And so I've gotten quite accustomed to having a lot of these conversations and breaking down that barriers, and we do write proposals, but a lot of what I do actually is just going and talking to people, taking people to the field or connecting them to some of our team members who are in the field. There's nothing better than just seeing the work. I mean, that's really transformative. But it doesn't happen with just everyone and anyone under all circumstances. I think before I got into this more, I tended to think, oh, okay, I understand why the Wildlife Conservation Network is based in San Francisco. It's right outside of Silicon Valley. There's lots of money there. That's great. Because lots of people are rich, and so lots of people are going to be able to give us money. And that's not always the case. There are plenty of wealthy people who don't want to give money. So when I approach people who might have a potential to be a donor, I always ask myself, and I encourage the people that we work with, because we do a lot of fundraising training, to ask themselves, like, okay, so do the people that you're talking to, do they have resources? That's the first step. And it's not always financial resources. It could be other resources. But if it is financial resources, are they philanthropic? Because there are lots of people who have resources and you could just be knocking at their door forever and never tap into it. So that's not a good use of your time. And then finally, are they interested in what you're doing? Because that might not be the case. So in our very limited scope, for instance, we have multiple species represented in our portfolio, and we organize these big expos. We get lots of donors who come, and we have lots of different conservation groups. We have groups that might work with elephants, other that might work with cotton-top tamarins. And if the cotton-top tamarin is going to talk to somebody and they're talking to them about cotton-top tamarins, and all the person says, oh yeah, the last time I was in Kenya, I saw this elephant, and they just keep going back to elephants. Well, that's a waste of your time. Just take that person and go introduce them to a person who does elephant work. And then hopefully we can have that spirit of generosity and have people that can move around. And it's proven to be quite successful. The other thing I've learned is that there's no one size fits all in this approach. There are different kinds of models of fundraising, whether you're working with individual donors, small family foundations, larger foundations, corporations, which Claudia talked a little bit about, and they all have different needs. And so I think what's really important is to understand what those needs are, what you present to them. We had a very successful partnership with a Wildlife Conservation Network with Tiffany's, and for a period of about 5 or 6 years, they contributed about $10 million. It started off with $1 million, and over that period, it rose to about 10. And I always wondered when the shoe was going to drop because I thought, it's not going to last forever. And it didn't. At some point, it cycled out. But for the time that we were able to engage with them, it started off around elephants for our elephant crisis fund. They did little charms of elephants, and that was very successful. They were very happy with the stories we gave them back because we understood that they wanted to have stories to give back to their customers. So then they said, "Oh, could we do something similar for lions?" So then they developed a lion charm, and then they did one for rhinos, and then they did a short one for coral reefs. What's really interesting actually was also that elephants always raised more money than lions. They always raised more money than rhinos, and then corals came last. And then at some point, there's only so many charms that people can buy. So I guess it cycled out, and we moved on. We had a very successful relationship with Disney, actually. For over 20 years, Disney has been supporting many of our programs. And when they came out with the new Lion King a couple of years ago, I think it was 2019, a lot of organizations wanted to work with Disney to be the recipient of the funding they're going to put out. And we proposed to them, because we had a lion recovery fund that was relatively not branded. We're not very big into branding, but we were able to disperse funding across to a wide array of conservation organizations that were working on lions. That included some of the bigger organizations like WCS, but also some very small organizations that most people would not have heard of. So we were that vehicle, and we were able to receive that funding from Disney for the Lion King. And when they released the new Lion King, they were so happy with the way that it had gone the first time, because we listened to their need. We weren't saying, yes, but can we do this? Can we do that? We respected their branding. It was very branded Disney, very small on WCN. And we were the recipient of a second philanthropic effort and put all that money back out in the field. So it's really important to listen and to understand and to recognize that not all relationships are going to work out in the same way. I think there's an old saying also that made a big impact for me, is that you ask people for money and they tell you what they think, they give you their opinion. And if you ask people for their opinion, at some point, you're likely to get their money. And so I think it's going out and really developing that relationship and asking questions. I think it's important also to understand that when you meet people who might be potential donors, to do much less talking and do much more listening. So if you listen in, then you can be very efficient about what you say and target to what their needs are. And I think we all naturally get a bit uncomfortable in these situations, and we just say, oh my God, this person has the possibility of helping me. I'm just going to tell them everything they need to know about the project, and we completely overwhelm them. And so that's a turnoff. It's just do a lot more listening. Listen, and then ask an occasional question, and then realize where you can insert your particular needs. If I were to leave you, I think with kind of 3 things to think about or to keep in the back pocket for people who might not be so familiar with fundraising. One would be if you walk into a room where there's potential funders, and I would say you're always in a room where there's potential funders. It could be on a plane or anything. You should always be ready to kind of have a story about impact about a place, about a species, about a community. Have a story about a person, like have a hero to that story. That could be you, that could be somebody that you worked with. And be ready to answer the question, well, what do you need? Too often we get people who really kind of get 2/3 of the way, and then somebody will say, well, how much do you need? And people fumble. They say, I don't know. Yeah. So just be ready. Have a number, make it up if you need to, but just be ready with those 3 things. Stop thinking about the fact that you might be asking people for money. You're really inviting them to partner with you. It's an invitation to do something together, and you're both bringing something to that table. And then finally is to try to look at the world through a lens of abundance. That's something that really was drilled into me here at TCD in the first place, and felt very natural when I moved over to the Wildlife Conservation Network. That value of abundance and a lens of generosity came from our founders. But I'd already been steeped into it here in the TCD community, where we share so much, we collaborate with each other. We don't look at, oh, if so-and-so gets this grant, then I won't be able to get that. So think of a world as this bigger world. There's a lot of resources out there. I'm actually not terribly worried about not having the funding to do the work. It's just a matter of unlocking it and unlocking it fast, because the need is right now. So last year, I'll just give this one quick example. I mean, I think everybody knows that there's a lot of funding cuts. Many of our, not us directly, but many of our partners were affected. I'm sure many people in the room were affected. And we were able to raise some funding to deploy to those organizations. I think over the past 2 years, we put out about $4 million in emergency grant to try to make off the losses. But we held a seminar with some of our donors, and we had a donor who said, you know, for all of you who are sitting on donor advised funds or are sitting on foundations where you might just be putting out the minimal 5% distribution, the time to put that money is now. I mean, it's, if you've been saving for a rainy day, it's now. So don't be afraid to tell people that the opportunities are now. There's tons of people doing great work, and you are all those people. And I think there's another flip side to all of this is all those personal connections. They matter in these corporations and these individual relationships, but I think they also matter in the work that Maria does, developing a lot of those relationships.
Okay, thank you, GJ. I think you shared a lot of really relevant insights for how WCN model works, especially making those connections with individual donors. And what I'll tell you about now is a little bit about my experience working as a program officer in the Andes Amazon Initiative at the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation. And again, just emphasizing that all of these entities are different animals, right? Different foundations have different mandates, different ways of working, similar to, you know, I'm not sure how a university fundraising operation works, but I'm sure that's an entire ecosystem. So every place is going to be a little bit different. And just to share a little bit too about where I came from, I never, you know, in graduate school or waking up one day thought, I want to work in philanthropy. It's just something that, you know, as your career evolves and as I began working following graduate school, you know, in academia, in the NGO world, fundraising is just, you know, a daily part of the struggle, right? You're always trying to figure out, okay, can I keep doing this work? How? What's the most strategic use of money? And through that process, I really learned a bit about how you can listen to what those entities' needs are and think about where you fit into that puzzle. And I would say from the perspective of the Moore Foundation, which is a private family foundation that was established over 25 years ago, there's a very much a strong sense of what was the intention of the founders, Gordon and Betty Moore, in establishing the foundation and what they saw as a vision for the foundation. So in fact, they established a founder's intent of what they wanted to do as a private foundation, and that was to have large-scale impact, durability, thinking really about evidence-driven approaches. So what might work, for example, for an individual donor that simply loves elephants, you know, is not necessarily the case of what's going to move a private foundation in another type of funder that has a very strong sort of grounding center of gravity and what is their mission. And in fact, within our initiative, you know, we have a 10-year strategy. We have a theory of change. And so what we're looking to do is really think about how we identify partners and partnerships and ways of collaborating that will help us achieve that long-term vision. So for us, in the Andes Amazon Initiative, we're really thinking about how do we avoid these ecological tipping points, ecological and social tipping points. And so we're really guided by that. And for example, in our work, we don't just do calls for proposals or accept unsolicited proposals. It's really about that work that we do in our program of identifying these critical partnerships and strategic partners. And when I say partnerships, it is really considered a partnership. It's not transactional. It's about establishing a relationship, finding synergy and alignment, and then also accompanying that process over time. So it's not about giving a grant and walking away and then coming back 2 years later, show me what you've done. It's really about informing that and also working together to bring in other types of ways that we can partner with people in terms of not just financial resources, but other resources, other partners that we know, other sources of information that might be useful and have a bigger impact. So, we see these partnerships as a collective effort to how we're going to make progress on the really ambitious long-term vision of the initiative. So that's one aspect I really wanted to share is, that way of working. And I just another little show of hands, how many of you all have sought funding but had some uncertainty about if your work actually aligned with what they wanted? Yeah, so that can be an uncomfortable feeling, right? And so I think if we were to talk about takeaways would be to ask questions, try to really understand what is that particular funder or entity trying to achieve and how might you contribute? Not to say, and I think we've all made this mistake, like, oh, my research is so amazing. I have the most convincing idea. Surely if I can just explain it a different way, they will see how valuable this is and want to fund me. And I can tell you how many ideas I get and hear that I'm like, wow, that is such a great idea. I really hope that they are able to secure funding, but that simply doesn't necessarily fit with what we're trying to do right now. So I think that's just something that took me a while to understand. And so it's really about the dialogue, the partnership, asking questions. Again, I think another sort of guiding aspect of our approach is rooted in the vision of the founders themselves is about durability. So, we have to ask ourselves, are these investments and grants going to strengthen an institution or system that can endure beyond our funding? So, we don't want to necessarily create a dependency. We want to support systems that can endure beyond funding cycles or project cycles. So I think that's another important thing to keep in mind, at least from where I sit. Another important part of philanthropy, and I think this is actually a really exciting part, is just that philanthropy can really be catalytic capital. It can really help change a financial architecture or an institutional architecture. And I think we heard about this in some of the examples brought forward earlier. And I think it's really valuable to think about how private foundations, for example, the Moore Foundation, and Avesita is here, she can speak a lot about how the Moore Foundation partnered early on to create these collective project finance for permanence, to think about how protected area systems could endure in the long term. So bringing in private dollars, but also leveraging public resources, securing commitments from those governments to maintain protected area systems over time. And I think that is a really important role of philanthropy in terms of leveraging other donors, bringing other donors on board, and then also helping to create the institutional capacity or strengths necessary to receive those funds. And I was talking with Juliana earlier today about the LIRA fund that Claudio and Susana were talking about, and how, and Ave again was there at the beginning with Juliana talking about how Moore Foundation could come in, but also help prepare IEP to receive the kinds of large funds that the Amazon Fund and BNDES were willing to put in. And that model was actually really impactful and successful. And then also thinking about how the LIRA Fund works now is actually, creating another level of capillarity. I'm not sure if that's the right word for translation from Portuguese, but really being able to unlock and diffuse funds to various small-scale grassroots associations working in and around protected areas or indigenous territories that are not going to be able to position themselves to access funding from an entity like the Moore Foundation, simply at the scale that they're working. And so how philanthropy can support those types of funding mechanisms, and there are more and more coming on board that have been incubated, for example, by public funds or banks, for example, like BNDES, Ford Foundation, other funders coming in to support territorial funds and get them ready to receive other philanthropic dollars. So I just can't emphasize that point enough. And I do think that that also links to my final point, which is just about how the challenges we face cannot be solved by one funder alone. And we know that, right? Like there's just simply not enough money or that one single entity could bring to the table. And so the importance of working in collaboratives and working collectively. And sometimes that happens in a more structured, formal way amongst philanthropies, but in many cases, it's simply informal networks and how we learn and share information, or we might hear about a really amazing project that doesn't fit in with our strategy, but we might say, hey, I think you could speak with so-and-so, and they might actually have some ideas too. So I think just that spirit of learning and collaboration is also something that is really critical to the way that, I've seen that philanthropy can work very effectively in these spaces. So in the interest of making sure we have some time for questions, I think, again, just in sum, we're here, all of us, I would say, because of a shared desire to have a positive impact. That doesn't happen alone with money. It's, money is not going to solve the problem. It's really the alignment of resources, strategy, leadership, opportunities, and, how we make sure all those things align for a change. And I think, we presented two models of how that can work. And I know others here have a lot that they could contribute to this conversation. So I welcome your comments, questions, additional points that might be useful for this room to hear.
Thank you.